Hello, everyone. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Stacey Dusing as part of our research update to talk about building capacity to implement best practice in the early detection of children with cerebral palsy. Please, Stacey.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today and share a little bit of the work we've been doing on capacity building. Capacity building is a huge piece of community engagement research, but the place that this starts really is thinking about why it's important. And so when we look at infants who are born preterm, like the infant in the upper left on this graphic, they have a long road to hoe in the NICU and neonatal intensive care unit, or babies who are born with early brain injury. Many of these children go on to have disabilities like cerebral palsy, but it's very difficult to identify the services that kids should get because we can't really identify well in the NICU which children are likely to have cerebral palsy and which are not. Currently in the United States, the average age of diagnosis of CP is around 24 months. Think about if that was a brain injury in an adult and we waited 24 months to diagnose them and start therapy services. That's a pretty long time. So when we think about young children, we need to not just support the children, but we need to support their parents and the family and the community that they'll be involved with, because many parents are grieving the loss of having a typically developing child, the normal birth process, and all the other components that they had expected in their childbearing years. So as we think about what this implies, we have to know and look at the early detection guidelines for cerebral palsy. And I'm just briefly going to point out that there are two pathways to detection of early cerebral palsy. One that's in children on the left with newborn detectable risk. These are infants who at birth, we can say they have a risk factor because they were preterm or had an early brain injury, versus infants on the right, who are those who come in and say, my child has a developmental delay, or I'm concerned about my child's development, typically over 6 months of age. One of the other interesting facts is that there are three components of the early detection guidelines, two of which can be commonly done by physical or occupational therapists, the neurologic exam, and then the diagnosis of a developmental delay. So much of the diagnostic process for cerebral palsy is in fact done by therapists or can be. One of the challenges that we see, though, in our profession is that many people aren't identifying the diagnosis process and starting it early enough. This became much more apparent when I moved to California recently, and we found that there's actually a disconnect between California's regulations and the internationally published guidelines for the early detection of cerebral palsy. And the main piece that I wanted to point out here is that there are three assessments that are recommended, two of which are done at 3 to 4 months of age, and then one that's done at 3 to 4 months of age, 12 and 18 months of age. The ones that are done at 3 to 4 months of age currently fall outside of the guidelines for California Children's Services, because California Children's Services recommends their first visit for children who are at high risk of cerebral palsy based on biological risk that is at 6 months of age. But that's outside the window of time that these tests can be used to early identify cerebral palsy. So one of the major processes that happened as we started to realize that this was actually a policy level issue was trying to identify the real nuances in how could we address this. And that would require a fair amount of capacity building, as well as understanding the legislative challenges. So in looking at that, we pulled together a network of professionals who really span all across the areas of early detection and intervention for children who have cerebral palsy or are born preterm. And this network includes providers from physicians to therapists, early intervention providers, and California Children's Services, who all came together to meet bi-weekly for over the course of a year to be able to develop some new policies, some new recommendations for regulations, as well as resources to help guide people on how we could navigate the current regulation system that we have while we work towards change happening. So this is really the guidelines for where we ended up. We have feedback from providers, parents, and policymakers about what the challenges are they're currently facing. As you'll note, all of them recommend or commented that one of the challenges is awareness of these guidelines is quite limited currently. So in looking at the challenges, we also identified that there was a need for providers to learn the new assessment tools that are available and to implement them into practice. We needed to make sure that parents knew how to share discharge information from the neonatal intensive care unit and had the resources and the information from the providers in the NICU to share that information with their pediatricians, and then to start to develop a roadmap for change, to provide information outside of our group and to be able to expand that across the state. These are some of the resources that the team developed. So there are guidelines again or documents again for providers. So for example, recommendations on all the common elements that should be included in a NICU discharge summary in order to share with the next pediatrician or the high-risk infant follow-up clinic the level of risk that this individual child has. There are documents for parents on how to identify if their own child is at risk for cerebral palsy, or how to get access to services, how to navigate the overlapping systems between California Children's Services, regional centers, outpatient therapy services, and high-risk follow-up clinics, so that families can understand where to go for services, and then to help providers make those same recommendations and navigate that same system. We also developed a website where all of these resources are available and downloadable for free. This website has an opportunity for both providers and families to be able to navigate the system and to kind of do a choose your own adventure to navigate the system for what you might get if you ask or answer a question in a specific way. We were able to launch this website in July to a large group of trainees who we were participating in some training. We have a website video or video that's posted on the website, which will be available in the chat following posting of this this brief talk. Oops. And one of the other places that we've really started to reach out is then, of course, is to the community. So we've reached out to medical providers, parent groups, and early intervention providers. We've also trained almost 70 therapists and physicians across the Los Angeles area in the neurologic exam that is done at the 3 time points. So we've been able to train providers at all of the primary hospitals, all of the local regional centers who wanted to send personnel, as well as all of the local California Children's Services centers. So each of them have had the training that they need to be able to implement this, this neurologic exam into practice. It's a unique neurologic exam because it's one of the few scorable exams. So it gives us the ability to really identify kids who are at early risk and those who are not. Our next step is that we're working towards continuing to expand the network to provide resources across the region and across the state, and are working on obtaining funding to start an actual implementation research project now that we've built some capacity behind the project. This is the team that's been collaborating on the early detection project. And of course, we need to thank our funders from the Zoomberg Research Coordination and T-Building Award that we were awarded last year. Thank you so much.